All right, we are live on YouTube. Perfect. So let me close that window and get this recording started. Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. As you know, we are facing extreme censorship alongside many other truth seekers out there. If you want to support this show, please go over to mattbelair.com and become a member. Share this podcast, leave a review, and most importantly, consider doing 3 kind acts wherever you are in the world today. Today's guest is the head of the Oculus Institute. He is the creator of the Awaken program that shows people how to escape burnout jobs and craft careers that inspire them. He has worked with over 1,000 different people, ranging from entrepreneurs, Fortune 500 executives, and professional athletes. Welcome to the show, Sean Sessel.
Thanks, Matt. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. You know, you're doing a field of work that is close to my heart, helping people break out of the rat race, get connected to their soul purpose, life purpose, or vocation, something that's meaningful, because when people do that, they inspire others, they're happier, and it's always of service to other people. It's never some sort of selfish aim. And I feel like that's what we need to do. So why don't we just start with you sharing a little bit about yourself, how you got into this work, some of your background that when reading your bio, you've done quite a few things. So why don't you bring us up to speed?
Yeah, absolutely. I graduated university and I had been planning to go into academia, but I didn't like the politics that's involved in that. And there's a lot more than I thought. It was not just the simple pursuit of truth by the process of science. And so I ended up going into consulting, and I got a job at a big consulting firm. And when you get recruited, they tell you a lot of things, right? Turned out a lot of that was true for some partners and not true for others. I'm the kind of guy, call me gullible, call me naive, whatever. But like, I take people at face value and I expect people to tell me the truth. And when they don't, then there tends, I call them out on it. I shoot straight with people. I want people to shoot straight with me, it's a reasonable request. But that created a thing where, I got in some conflict there and it led to burnout. And I was like, okay, fine. This job didn't work out. I freelanced for a while, made more money, and I made like twice as much in a third of the time. Life seemed good, but I had this emptiness in my soul because I wasn't doing anything really meaningful. And so I took all that time and all that money and I was going out partying and doing drugs and all kinds of chasing girls, all kinds of stuff, because I wasn't fulfilled. And so then eventually I got another job at a financial firm. It's a $1.4 billion RIA. And again, I burned out, right? And, most of it was interpersonal relationships with my boss. But I got to this point where I came to the belief that you either have to sell your soul and just, be submissive to somebody in a corporate hierarchy, or you have to be broke, and that there's no other option. And neither one of those lives was acceptable to me. And I got really depressed, like on the brink of suicide depressed. And not just me thinking, I wonder if I should kill myself, like staring down the barrel of my gun, and it was really dark. And then there was this bizarre series of, synchronicities that led me to a room with a guy who was talking about values and success and purpose, etc. And of all the people in that room, for me, something lit up. And I think that's because I had started studying in an esoteric school way back when I was in university. And I've been doing it on and off for many years. And so I had done a lot of deconditioning work. But when that epiphany hit me, I realized my core function was to absorb, process, and transmit information. And I was going to do so in a way that I could help as many people as I can, and also create a very wonderful life for myself. And I figured out that the way to do that was not in a public school or not in a university. It was in the private sector, human to human, leveraging the internet, writing, reaching as many people as I could. And that is how the Oculus Institute was born. And the first program that I created was one that is near and dear to my heart, to help people go through that same transformation I did. And, eventually I'm going to create a whole bunch of other programs, but this one will always be the most special to me. And that's the Awaken program.
Wow. Whoa. That's an amazing story. And I didn't know about the, the near death segment. It's interesting how many people go through that experience or something similar because they feel like they don't have another option, right? There's nothing else. It's like I have to do this job that I hate and it's soul sucking, or then I have to be broke and I can't handle that. And it's interesting because I actually did a video today about um, basically not compromising your soul. Not That's the biggest water bottle I've ever seen in my life. As a side,
Drink
as
a
a
lot
big,
of water.
you're staying well hydrated. That's rule number one: to stay well hydrated so your brain can function properly. I was talking about ruthless spiritual integrity, and what happens is we take these jobs and we compromise and we compromise and we compromise until we don't know who we are. Right. And so let's talk a little bit about the Awaken program. Like, what are some of the steps, or how do you help people? Because I feel like that's what people think. And it's very challenging to like say, okay, you know what, now I'm going to let go of all this security because this job comes with a paycheck. And I understand that. And maybe you have a family, and that's even riskier. Right. So how do you bridge that gap, or where do they begin to declutter, right? And go from confusion to, you know what, now I have an aim of what's inspiring to me, and also a plan of, okay, this could make money. I can be successful.
So step one is you got to know where you are, right? Just like you go into a doctor's office, you need to run some tests, right? And so the questions I like to ask are, one is, where are you on the scale of career fulfillment, right? Where is it totally toxic? Is it just unfulfilling? Is it something that's fun for now, but isn't going to last in the long run? Is it something that you could do until retirement? Or is it something that you could never stop doing? Like you can't even retire from it because it's too fun, right? Where are you on that scale, right? And then financially, where are you, right? Are you broke? Are you in uncertainty where you don't really know? Are you secure, but like locked into a salary? Are you able to go make more money whenever you want? Or do you have so much money that you don't even have to worry about it, right? Where are you on that scale? And then internal alignment, right? Is your mindset so chaotic that you're just struggling day to day and week to week, right? Is it something where, it's fragmented, where, you're fine in like a week or two at a time, but like long-term projects tend to fall apart? Is it something where you're blocked, where like most things are good, but you got a couple areas of your life that you just can't get past? Or is it something where you're unified, where you're like, really making progress, and, you can go for a year or two and really improve some area of life? Or is it something where you're unshakable, where you can set a purpose and you can hold that till the day you die, right? Where are you on that scale, right? So you want to figure out, where are you? That's step one. And then you have to make, wherever you are, you have to say, okay, am I happy with these results? If the answer is no, then there's a decision point. And that decision point is something that most people, they want to jump straight into doing something. But if you don't make a decision, if you don't swear an oath to yourself, if you don't commit that you're going to go get to where you want to be on that scale, because if you're not happy here, and you want to get here, you have to commit, right? You have to tell yourself, come hell or high water, whatever it takes, I'm going to do it. And you have to be real that it's going to be hard. You have to be real that it's going to be challenging. But that's where it starts, right? And so then high level, right? Ultimately, what you got to put together to have a career that satisfies all three of those metrics is, you got to find some way to serve your fellow human beings. You got to find some way to persuade them that you can add value to their lives. And you've got to find a way to do it in a way that's fun. Getting paid to play, as Alan Watts would say. And most people, they think they need a whole hell of a lot more than that. They think they need 15 degrees and the this and the that and the authority and the years and the resume and the camouflage. And, they build out all this complex stuff that they think they need. But at the end of the day, it's not that hard. You need to find a way to serve your fellow human beings in a way they care about. You need to find a way to communicate to them that you will and can do so, which is a step most people skip. They don't like to sell themselves. They don't like to market themselves. They don't like to persuade. But you can't expect everybody else to be psychic. You got to do your communication job. You want to do it in integrity, obviously, but you have to do it in a way that, that hits home with people, right? And then you want to format it around like your core function. So then that's the high level. To actually make that work, there are two journeys. There's an internal journey and there's an external journey. So the internal journey starts with, what I would call the key principles of esoteric schools, which is disidentification. You are not your mind, right? If you think of a robot, right? Your body is like the metal of the robot. Your mind, all the thoughts going around in your head, the chattering monkey mind, is like the software that the robot runs on. You are the programmer. Most people, they think they are their thoughts. They get caught in the chattering monkey mind. They think that's them, but this is not, right? You're the programmer. You're the observer behind, right? And so you observe, you study, right? You look at things like complaining, entitlement, revenge, blame, people-pleasing, deferring to authority, self-judgment, false fronts. You look at the stresses of anger, guilt, fear, and grief. You look at the tricks of the mind, things like greed, things like replaying records, things like associations and expectations, right? And you study it. You get to know it very well. And then you move from being the servant of the mind to being the master of the mind, right? You're now in a position where you understand your mind enough that you can actually go reprogram it instead of just being scared of it, which is most people, they're like scared of their mind. Well, what if I feel this way? What if I think this? You know, it's like you're running around, like it's like being scared of your kids is, you know, bizarre. Though there are some people who are
I'm
parents
terrified of my daughter. I don't know if she's only 18 months. She runs the show. So I don't know. We'll have to do a private session on that. If you know, shopping today, and if I turn the cart the way that she didn't want, I get yelled at. So, you know, I got lots of work to do.
To be fair, I don't have children. I do have several friends who do. And the one guy I know who runs, he has like 6 businesses and 5 kids and all this kind of stuff. And his kids are like the most well-behaved kids ever. And rule number 1 is that he's not scared of his kids. Yeah, maybe I should set you up with a session with him because he's the real expert on that subject.
Yeah, sounds good.
But that's the thing is like people get scared of their mind. And once you go to being the master of your mind, now you can finally get clear on what do you really believe and what do you really value? And that totem pole of values is absolutely critical for getting clear on your purpose. And that's the difference between when I was in that room and everybody else in that room. The reason I lit up and they didn't light up is because I had taken out all of the conditioning. I had taken out all of the shoulds and the other people's values and the have tos and all that crap, right? Because society inserts a lot of values in there. And if you don't pay attention, they could be sitting there and they're not really authentic, right? Or you can have values there. Like this is another thing is if I'm having people build a values totem pole and it's ever anything based in moving away from or fear or any of that kind of stuff, that's not real. It's all illusions from the mind, right? So you got to weed all that stuff out. Then once you get clear on your real values, now the external journey can begin. So there are a couple psychometric tests that I like to use. I use the DISC test. I use the motivators assessment, and I use that totem pole of values. I combine that with, you know, whatever insights my clients come up with during the time, as well as I seem to have a little bit of an art for getting an answer and thinking outside the box. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a superpower of mine. But when you take all that and you combine it, now we can get clear on an end target purpose, right? Now, very often that's something that takes years to build, right? If you want something really awesome, it's going to take time to make it happen. There are exceptions, but you know, sometimes people have already put in a lot of work and they don't even know it, right? But normally it takes time to build. And so that brings us to the next part of the external journey, which is dream bridges. So a dream bridge is anything that is going to be an improvement on both that career fulfillment metric and on the financial success metric. So those 2 metrics I talked about earlier, a dream bridge is one that improves both of them, right? It's not where you're making a trade-off one for the other. Because if you sit there and you're just trading off one for the other, you're going to be trading off against each other till judgment day. That's not what you want to do, right? Better to put in some thought and some planning and do it right. So you're always taking steps forward in every aspect, right? And there are different ways you can do that. You can do that through employment. You know, sometimes it's just a matter of your job really sucks and you get a better job and then you move on to something else later. You could do it for freelancing. I mean, like, yeah, I've had many clients who double their income and reduce their hours, right? You know, like they may be working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and then they could double their income and work half as much, right? Now, freelancing does require you to know how to market yourself, but you know, it's once you have that skill, and especially like if you have freelance platforms, you know, and you know, Upwork is the biggest one, but there are also a bunch of niche ones that tend to be better depending on what niche you're in, right? Once you establish that reputation of being, high quality on that platform, then people start sending you requests, right? Like, like if I turn on my Upwork thing, I don't even have to send out proposals. People will be inviting me to apply to shit, because I have that reputational history from years of doing it and all that kind of stuff. So you can go and you can do that. And then, of course, the third one is entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship is more likely to be an end purpose and less likely to be a dream bridge, because entrepreneurship normally takes years to build. But there are some cases where you can do rapid entrepreneurship. I do know somebody, and he will not even start a company if he cannot make $1 in the first 24 hours. If he cannot sell at least $1 in the first 24 hours, he won't even pursue the business.
Wow.
So, there are different criteria that determine whether rapid entrepreneurship is a good fit. I mean, especially a lot of people have something that they've been doing on the side that's, kind of like a side hustle that you can upscale pretty quickly. So, you want to look at those channels. You want to look at where you want to get in purpose. You want to look at where you are, and you want to say, what are the steps, right? What are the stepping stones to get from A to B? And then it's a matter of executing on those stepping stones, right? And again, depending on which channel you're in, employment or freelancing or entrepreneurship, you're going to need different things. But ultimately, it all comes down to being able to communicate your value, right? Whether it's communicating to a company that you're going to pursue, that you're going to achieve the values and the outcomes that they need, whether it's communicating to clients in freelancing or entrepreneurship, whatever it is, right? That marketing of yourself is something that so many people, they try to avoid. They try to have, some person vouch for them and get them an in at this company, or they try to have enough credentials that they don't, they can just send a 34-page CV or whatever, right? And at the end of the day, like, if you don't have confidence in yourself and you don't have the conviction to convey that, why should anyone else have confidence in you?
Yep. Holy man, that was amazing. The first thing I want to just touch on is you mentioned 3 things: the totem pole of value, the DISC test, and what was the third one?
The motivators assessment. So if you go to tonyrobbins.com/DISC, not that I work for Tony or I'm affiliated with him in any way, but he has the cheapest DISC and motivators assessment on the market right now. You go to tonyrobbins.com/DISC, you can get both the DISC and the motivators. You want to get the actual numbers, and I think he's charging like $15 or something. He may be charging 20 now. He keeps raising his prices on it, but it's still cheaper than anywhere else. So as I said, I'm not affiliated with him. I just want you guys to get the best deal.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate that. Everything you shared was so practical. It was amazing. We could have just cut the podcast right there. What I loved about it was you basically touched on everything that's important, talking about how that it is challenging, right? That you need to get into alignment, that there are, these real factors in the world, but so many people out there want this really quick fix sometimes, you know what I mean? And they want this certainty of success on the other side, but saying, hey, this might actually take a while. This might be a journey, and you need to have the inner world sorted out so the external world gets sorted out. And so all of that was incredibly brilliant. And so what I figure I'll follow up with is the question that I gave to my coaching group last week, which I thought was good. It's something that I try to figure out, and it's how do we really live in self-worth? Like, if we could wake up and be 100% like full of self-love, like we loved our puppy dogs, or we loved our mothers, or we like a brother or sister, like that genuine love to feel content and full of that. Because like when you were on the side of like, I want to end my life, I'm sure self-worth and self-love wasn't high on the scale, right?
Not present.
And so yeah, when it's really dark, maybe you can give some practical advice for people really struggling right now. How do they get to that next level, right? Just going from like, oh my God, I can't stand this, to, okay, I've got a little bit of space. I can equate it to like jujitsu or something, where if you're getting choked out, you're going to pass out. But if you can get a little bit of air, if you can get an arm in, or you can disrupt a bit, you can then get to the next step, and escape the choke. And I feel like we're kind of strangle holding ourselves sometimes, and how we feel, and how we feel worthless and not good enough sometimes. So maybe you can take a stab at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have a process for that. And it's actually, I'm going to use a martial arts analogy as well. But before I do, excellent, I just want to comment that that element of self-worth is more frequently the thing holding people back than anything else that I've seen, right? There are times when that's not the thing holding people back, but more often than not, it is, right? And if you look at most coaches, they focus so much on the valence, on don't you want this, on like trying to sell you on your dream. They don't realize that it's not that people don't value it. It's that they don't believe in themselves and they don't value themselves. And it's something that's underappreciated, I think, in the coaching industry. But it is the thing, you know, that stops more people from going on this journey than anything else. So how do you overcome it? Well, I'm sure you've heard the saying that, you know, when you show up and you're a white belt, a punch is a punch and a kick is a kick. And then once you get to be a brown belt, then at that point you see a punch is so much more than a punch and a kick is so much more than a kick. But once you are a 5th degree black belt, you realize that once again, a punch is a punch and a kick is a kick. And it's much the same way with self-love. So in the beginning, you show up, you have to understand that that's the problem. You have to understand that's what's going on, right? Once you realize, hey, this is what's really holding me back, that's step number one. Most people, they don't appreciate that that's actually the thing. They think it's just something else. Like, oh no, it's the fact that I haven't, you know, gotten this degree, or oh, it's the fact that, you know, I don't know how to market, or, oh, it's the fact that, you know, I was doing this thing, but my parents said this, and my sister said this, and my wife said this, and blah, 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 blah. And they have all these excuses, and they don't realize that this is the thing. So step one is realizing just exactly what it is and making the decision, hey, I'm going to work on this. Then step two, a punch is more than a punch and a kick is more than a kick. Now you really have to understand it, right? Back to the esoteric principles, disidentification and observation. You see that inner bully in your mind is not you. You are not beating yourself up. You have a rogue program in your head that is beating you up. And you sit there, and instead of getting all worked up about it, you study it. You listen to what it has to say, not because you're taking it seriously, but because you're studying its bullshit, right? You pay attention to its tricks, right? You see how, you know, it will condemn you for A, but it will also condemn you for B, and you can't win for losing, right? And you really wrap your head around how it works. And then once you've really come to understand it, then once again, it becomes very simple. A punch is a punch and a kick is a kick. And that is when you make the decision that come hell or high water, you're not going to listen to this inner bully anymore. And this is the point where a lot of people get stuck because they realize it, they study it, and they say, oh man, I've been studying it and so on and so forth. And then they may find themselves trying to like appease the inner bully, and they're studying it to be a better servant instead of to be its master, which you have to be very careful of, right? But they get in this point and then they say, oh, I don't know how. I wish I just knew how to fully love myself, like, because I know it's a problem. I've really studied it. I've seen how it's impacting me. I wish I just knew how, right? But you can make the commitment to do something without knowing how to do it. If some evil spiritual entity, some fallen angel or grand demon or whatever came to you and said, listen, until you figure out how to love yourself, I'm going to burn away an ounce of flesh every day, right? You'd figure it out pretty quickly. You could commit to figuring it out without knowing exactly how you're going to do it. And funny enough, is that final commitment where you're really committed without knowing how is 90% of the battle. Because once you've done that, all that stuff, all that study is going to come into play. And suddenly you're going to find, just like in the Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. You've been doing it the whole time because you've been studying it. And once you make that final commitment, it comes into practice really quickly.
I love that. That's such a great analogy. I use one similar. I say like, okay, like if they're transitioning on jobs or something, I was like, well, just say you got fired tomorrow and you had to make, I don't know, $3,000 a month online or close to what you enjoy, or your whole family's going to get murdered.
Yeah.
Would you figure it out? And you're like, yeah. And that's like will, like you're talking about that decision, right? And that commitment. And I feel like that goes into will, like your willpower. And I feel like that's your spiritual power. And when people talk about the law of attraction or they get really esoteric, I think that there are these ancient and timeless practices that work. And then I feel like white belts, for lack of a better term, kind of learn that kicking and punching exists. And then they'll try to teach it, but they don't have that level of mastery that a black belt does.
Yep.
And so they miss a little bit of grounding. And so one of the best
Yep. I
examples that I
so
like,
agree with that statement.
right?
I
Yeah, because,
totally agree with that.
yeah, you need the processes and you need to also have that understanding, right? So, when it comes to will, I think Yogananda really wrote a brilliant book, and it's so small. It's called Scientific Affirmations. And affirmations are something that is very commonly understood and used in the self-help community. And when a master teaches it, you hear in their words like, oh, this guy really gets it. In Zen, they'll talk about levels of understanding, how maybe some of the principles, there aren't a million of them. You just deepen that level of understanding. Punch is a punch, kick is a kick type of deal.
I'll tell you one principle that for me, I just keep finding new levels of depth on is the principle of surrender.
Go on. I hear you. I get it. Go on.
So surrender is not about giving up on the goal. You can still have the desire, right? But it's it's about not being attached to the outcome. And I found that, as I've gone through life, I keep thinking that I'm detached from the outcome. And then I keep seeing that I'm more attached than I thought that I was, right? And that every time I find a new level of detachment and a new level of independence from the outcome, suddenly I level up externally as well, right? So much so that I coined a term, the law of repulsion. So we know about the law of attraction, right? Which is that desire and attention, all this kind of stuff will attract it to you. But the law of repulsion is that emotional attachment to the outcome, dependence on the outcome will repel it from you. And this is why some people, they try to use the law of attraction, but they're so egoically trapped that they end up triggering the law of repulsion.
I love that. Yeah. And that's an interesting concept because we usually are thinking about the positive side, right? Oh, this is what we're going to get. This is what we're going to get. And we hold on, so hard that, that we're actually impeding what we want. The way that I'm kind of understanding this is one in like a punch, you want to be loose until contact. And then the other one is snowboarding. So there is a real surrender element when you're going to do a backflip. When you're flying at a jump, it's 50, 70, 80 kilometers an hour, and you're going to go upside down. You can't just smash your body off the lip of the jump because you're going to get upside down. You got to slowly do it. And that's why the bigger the jump, the more frightening it is, but also the safer it is if you can remain relaxed. And so, and that reminds me of one of the teachings that I had from studying with the monks, because I talked about, I heard that the root of suffering was desire, right? And so I was asking one of the monks, I said, hey, I heard the root of suffering is desire, and I desire to sell these books. I wrote a book and I'd like a lot of kids to read them because I feel like it would improve their lives. And they said, that's not desire. I said, what do you mean? Of course it is. I'm desiring for the books to get sold and to do this. They go, well, it's not for you. And you kind of, this is for other people. You've given a gift that you want people to have, right? You're giving value, you're giving something to others that will benefit them. That's different. So if you're unattached to what the result is and you're giving it purely, that's not desire. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. And you said something similar at the beginning where you said, now shoot, I'm blanking on it.
It's not about giving up on the goal. It's okay to desire it. It's not okay to get attached to it, right? Because the term that I had always learned from Buddhism was that the root of suffering is attachment. Is the translation that I had always learned.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that would be terrible. And at the beginning you talked about how it's benefiting other people. Like when you come into your vocation, it's how does it serve your community?
Yeah,
right?
if you're not serving other human beings, then like why would they compensate you, right? Like what is money anyway? Like people get all hung up on money and their concepts of money and capitalism this and whatever that and politics this and something. All money is a measure of the debt owed to you by society in exchange for the value that you've provided or the value that somebody else provided and gifted to you. Right? That's all it is. It's a measure of the debt owed by society. Right. And so if you want to accumulate wealth, right, which is a debt owed by society, then you need to provide wealth in the form of value, right? It's Emerson's law of compensation. The value that you provide and the value that you receive should be roughly proportional. If you try to consume a lot of value without providing value, then generally karma will kick you in the ass. If you try to, provide a lot of value, but you don't allow yourself to receive, you'll find yourself restrained, right? You'll find your ability to scale limited. You'll find yourself depleted of energy. And so it's about this flow, right? Money isn't about accumulation. It's about river. It's like a river flows through you of wealth. And the goal is to maximize the flow, not to try and dam up the river and try to collect as much as you can.
Well, is that, I wonder if you think that that would be the reason why people who are doing corporate jobs hit burnout and don't feel so positive in the end. Like some of these jobs, you can make a lot of money, but they don't, not only don't give value, they actually take from other people. Some of these jobs, or they're just like, I'm going to crunch numbers and do all this all day, but I'm providing no value. I'm actually creating harm. So do you think that, because a lot of jobs you can make a ton of money for doing crappy things like Wolf of Wall Street, for example, or many of the other jobs out there that don't provide for other people, but they get that paycheck and they also get bonuses and they get these things, but that what they're pushing doesn't actually help. So do you feel like that's where their internal compass or frustration would come from if they still had that?
I think that can be. I think that a lot of jobs, people, it's hard to see the value, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? Like as somebody who's crunched numbers before, I can see like some of the projects where I crunched numbers, there was a lot of good. It just was way down the line and you had to look hard to see it. And I think that's another thing is that sometimes if people don't, if they're not aware of the value that they're creating at the end of the line, even if they're creating it, they're just super detached from it. That can cause them to feel unfulfilled. If you are actually in a job where you're not creating value, or God forbid, destroying value, like Wolf of Wall Street stuff, then yeah, that will, for most people, create a pretty significant disconnect and a pretty significant barrier. But even if you're in a job where you are creating value, where you're aware of the value you're creating, if you are doing it in a way that isn't in line with your natural talents, preferences, and your personal values, then that misalignment can really screw you, right? So like I've seen people who are working for nonprofits, who are the nonprofits doing a hell of a lot of good, right? And that person can be crucial to the nonprofit. And you can look at the value that they're adding and you can say, man, this is huge. But what they're doing on a day-to-day basis goes against their natural behavioral modalities, right? Where you have people who are, potentially high energy, high rapport people who are sitting there filling out forms, doing stuff that's very like detail oriented and slow, right? It's like taking a cheetah and trying to make them, run at 10 miles an hour, right? It creates this disconnect, right? It's like trying to take a squirrel and making it swim instead of letting it run through the trees. And so you've got to be in tune with like, not just what's providing value to people, but like what's my way of channeling that value and the way that's best for me. What am I built to do? And in the end of the day, you're going to be able to add more value doing what you're meant to do than anything else.
I absolutely love it, man. We're kindred spirits. I use that example too, and just say it like if you're a beaver pretending to be an eagle, you're going to be a terrible beaver, and you're going to hate it. You know what I mean? And so, and that also kind of goes along with connecting to your nature. And I feel like your nature is connected to the natural world, which is connected to the spiritual world. It is harmonic. It works together. If you're an eagle, it's like those birds. Well, actually, not these birds in particular, but the ones on National Geographic. They got to jump out of this super high nest, and then they get all messed up on the rocks on the way down. It's super sad to watch. But normally, other birds would be able to jump out and fly right away. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's so brutal. This whatever species of birds has to go so high up so they don't get eaten by anything, and then they get to a certain age, they have to do this leap of faith off this super high cliff, and they kind of try to slow themselves down, but they still get their butt kicked once they hit the rock. So it's terrible. But anyway, birds, naturally will fly. Ideally, you don't have to do that suicide jump first.
Right.
I wanted to switch gears a little bit. What do you think the limits of human potential are, and how do you see this connected to what's happening on our planet right now? Right, some people call it the Great Awakening. When we started the show, we we're having a great discussion, and I was telling you about one of my Mayan elder teachers, Carlos Barrios, who has unfortunately recently passed. He told me that he was taught they have 20 senses, and you were the first person I kind of said that to. He was like, "Oh yeah, my buddy has like measured some other senses," and I was like, "What do you mean? Go on." So what do you think the limits to human potential is, and how do we connect with that idea? And do you think we're headed in that direction where some of us will evolve into some sort of greater understanding, or maybe new abilities?
So I'm going to lead off by saying I don't know where the limits are. I have seen things most people would not believe. I've experienced things most people would not believe. Um, in my case, some of it's pretty well documented. As I told you before we got started on the show, a couple years ago, I was walking home from the gym. Some woman took a left turn illegally at full speed. I got hit by a van. My left knee buckled. My face shattered her windshield. I woke up 41 feet away. They scooped me off the street, put me on oxygen. 3 hours later, I walked out of the hospital under my own power. I got a whole bunch of scans that they did, a whole bunch of ligament damage, cartilage damage, meniscus damage, healed it all, no surgery, full recovery. Doctors could not explain that. I have a mentor who had stage 3 lymphoma, right? A guy named Mark von Muser. And, he just got over it, went in, his oncologist was like, I don't know what to say. I'm confused, So, I mean, I once trained with a samurai, and he used chi in such a way where he could stand on one foot. So he bounced on one foot with his other leg up, and then pushing sideways with his arm was able to push me over onto my back if I was resisting with all my might. And I used to play rugby, and he's nearly 80, right? So just the leverage of going sideways with your shoulder muscle while you're bouncing on one leg, like it just that doesn't work, right? Normally, right? So there's so much out there that we have yet to fully explain. Listen, I'm a man of science. I'm a published scientist, right? You can go type my name in, you're going to find articles that I published on molecular design, all kinds of stuff. And there's too much that I've seen it can't be coincidence, right? There are forces that we have yet to fully understand. I'm not entirely sure of exactly how they modulate into physical reality. I have hypotheses. I think quantum non-randomness is definitely worth exploring. I think electromagnetic fields, especially when it comes to consciousness, are worth exploring. I don't know if you've ever read The Electromagnetic Brain by Dr. Shelley Joy, wonderful book. But if you just take quantum non-randomness, for example, the limits of quantum non-randomness are really, really, really far beyond where we are, right? Because it takes advantage of the butterfly effect from a molecular level upwards, right? So any complex system can see almost the more complex it is, the more emergent properties it has, the greater the scale of the effects. And what's more complex than the human body and the human mind, right? I've even seen stuff with computers, which are sufficiently complex for quantum non-randomness to manifest in ways that, again, most people would not believe, right? It's actually almost it's almost funny, right? How far my life experience is now compared to where it was 10 years ago, before I'd experienced a lot of this. And so where are the limits? I don't know. I really don't know. But I do think that I'm almost certain that in order to tap into these higher levels of functioning, it requires you to reach a state where the soul, right, or the awareness, or whatever you want to call it, right, that the programmer that I talked about earlier, has to move from being asleep or being subservient to the mind, the chattering monkey mind, the egoic mind. It has to take its rightful place as being in charge. It has to cut the chains of servitude from the mind to the soul so that the soul can exist freely. Because only by doing that do you gain the ability to tap into any of this. Every single person I've ever met who's had any of these experiences has gone through this process, has studied in some kind of esoteric school, has, through, even if it's not a formal school, has somehow gone and explored this part of themselves and come to this conclusion and had their soul take their rightful place over the mind. And every single person who hasn't done that, I've never seen them have these kinds of experiences. So.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's especially challenging to try to wrap it up in some sort of scientific understanding. It seems to go beyond that realm. And even if you look at the double slit experiment, when the
Yeah,
observer
I
is,
love that.
right? When the
You can
observer
demonstrably prove that consciousness has an effect on reality, right? And sometimes retroactively in time. So I don't know if you've seen like the quantum erasure experiment, right? But they have conclusively demonstrated at the quantum level that consciousness can affect reality retroactively in time.
Can you explain that one? I haven't heard of that one.
Right. So when you do the double slit experiment, right, you know that if you measure it as a particle, it's a particle. If you measure it as a wave, it's a wave, right? If you make that information inaccessible, like, and when I say inaccessible, I mean like from a quantum level, you make it impossible to retrieve, like it was inside of a black hole, then it actually reverts back to being both a particle and a wave. Quantum erasure. You can go look it up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. That's yeah. So, okay. That was I didn't know what that was. I thought that was the double split experiment when they
So
put
the quantum
observer
erasure is a derivative of the double slit experiment.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Which is
related.
Incredibly fascinating. So I guess I'll kind of segue into how do we tap into these abilities? What is the practical way that we can wake up full of self-worth, self-love, and then direct our life toward a meaningful pursuit, but also stay content, right? With that surrender process. I feel like that's really the challenge is like, okay, this is where I am. And this is where I'd like to go, and it's meaningful and purposeful. But how do I engage in this process with all the challenges of life, and kind of have resolve? I think of the work of like David Goggins when you're talking about will. Well, that guy is just sheer will and doing things that are basically impossible and have no idea how he's done them, but he's decided that he's going to continue and just do all these incredible things. So I feel like that ability we all have access to, but how do we tap into that type of spirit or force and engage in a way where we do remain content, where it's not like, oh, I need to get to this level, then I'll be good enough, or it's this level, then I'll be good enough.
So I think, as I said, and I'm always going to come back to this, is disidentification and observation. And this is why people talk about journaling, right? Journaling is very helpful. But what you want to do is you want to journal from the perspective of the soul, not the perspective of the mind. You don't want to journal from the perspective of, hey, I went to the store and I bought a bucket of eggs today. You want to journal from the perspective of, while I was at the store, this other person cut in front of me a line. And then I noticed the mind was getting angry at that and was blaming them. And in reality, it cost me a total of 30 seconds. And I probably shouldn't have been spending that much energy on something so dumb, right? Right? So journaling from the perspective of the soul instead of, all random external stuff. And I think that's why journaling for most people, like you'll have some people who get like so much out of journaling and you'll have some people who get like nothing out of it. I think a lot of it comes down to like, where are you journaling from? And so what I have my clients do is like, I have them do exercises where, for example, we go through the different things I was talking about earlier, like complaining. I'll say, hey, spend 5 days observing your complaining. And while you're at it, spend 5 days observing when everybody else complains to you and how you feel about that, right? Build some awareness, build some spiritual vigilance. I'll say, go spend 5 days journaling about what you believe you have a right to, right? We'll talk about entitlement. And then would you say that that's a perceived right that has no codification anywhere? Is that a practical right where it's like written down in a document? Or is it a transcendent right that's in the laws of the universe that it truly cannot be taken from you no matter what? Because somebody could break their contract, but they can't stop you from choosing what you believe, right? They may try in, certain communist countries, try to, tell you, hey, you have to believe this, but you can't control that, right? And so have people go and say, observe blame. Who are you blaming? What for? What would they really have to do to get you to stop blaming them? Like, is that reasonable? Is that something that could happen? Are you, if it's not, are you just going to carry around this blame for the rest of your life? Or are you going to drop it? Because you're blaming them. They ain't hurting them. It's hurting you. What's that saying about drinking poison, expecting the other person to die? Right? So I found that just, a lot of observation and creating that distance and really understanding oneself and building that sense of spiritual vigilance and building that sense of the soul beyond the mind is ultimately what loosens the ties, right? Now, once somebody's done that for, at the very least, many months, right? Then you can start exploring deeper stuff, right? Then you can get in touch with, like beliefs and values at the level of the soul rather than the mind, right? because that's all the soul really does. It decides what's true and what's valuable, and serves as a conduit for energy, which is another story. So experience, right? It also experiences, right? But like once you've done that for a long time, then you can go into things like, really deeply exploring gratitude, really deeply exploring love. And when I say love, the Greeks have like 6 words for the English word love, but especially agape, which is divine love, right? Really deeply exploring, being grateful for others and being grateful for yourself, because you need both to really have agape, right? You really need to be able to appreciate what you bring to the table in a relationship and what they bring to a table, right? And it's not just a romantic relationship, any kind of relationship, any human being ever, right? Really deeply exploring presence, really deeply exploring the nature of the aesthetic experience, right? Of finding the beauty in nature, of finding the beauty in the works of man. A lot of people, they condemn, the creations of mankind, but there's so much intelligence flowing through these things we've created. You and I are sitting here on, 1,000 miles apart or something, right? Talking to all these people, right? It's amazing, right? What humanity's created. And that, when you see the intelligence, not just the electrons, but the intelligence running through everything, right? How we've gone and we've done our own little creative bit, like that's amazing, right? And when you really get in touch with that sense of wonder, right, at the natural world, at art, at science, and all this kind of stuff, right, you start to build, right, this spiritual body. You start to build this power. And if you really want to go really deep, try to take yourself outside of time. Try to perceive outside of time. So the analogy I like to use here is like, you aren't like, you're a character in a story, but the character in the story is a fragment of thought from the author of the story. And if you could take the perspective of the author and see the author's perspective of your character, at first it starts to be intellectual, but if you do it enough, then you can have this visceral experience of being outside of time, which is totally brain boiling. I can't adequately describe it in words, but it's totally worth having. And like, that's when you go into these deeper mysticism and these deeper experiences. And, for some people, psychedelics help with that, right? That said, I would recommend that you start with getting a solid grounding and really understanding the mind from the perspective of the soul, and really doing that work. Because a lot of people will attach a lot of ego to certain things. And that's especially true, if you destabilize the ego with psychedelics and you don't have anything to take its place, then all it's going to do is reform in a more bizarre configuration, right? So you have to have the soul built before you go down that road, I think, which some people haven't done. And then, I like to study, I would recommend people study the phenomena of nature so that you're working with the laws of the world and not against them. And yes, gravity and electromagnetism and all that are laws of nature, but so is, as we said, the law of attraction. It's not the only one, but it is one. The law of repulsion we talked about earlier, that's another law, right? It's totally real. You could observe it, right? Go get a journal, document it, do an experiment. I did, right? And I was like, wait a second. I'm a man of science, and my data has revealed to me that my conception of the world is not what I thought it was. I have a whole manifestation equation, actually, in one of the things I teach clients. And one of the things that I found is important is understanding. The more you understand something, the more your ability to manifest it, right? There's a direct link there, right? So study those phenomena. Learn to feel the currents of like where the universe is pushing you, right? You'll find like these kind of like weird synchronicities that are beyond the realms of chance. Pay attention to that. Don't just be like, oh, that was weird, and go on with your life. No, pay attention, right? There's something there, right? And when you start to read those currents, it's like surfing, and there's a lot of power to be found there, because then you're not burning up all your energy resisting a wave that you're never going to be able to resist. So those are some things that you could do.
Wow. Yeah. I love all that. Well, you can't say manifestation equation and then not share it. So tell me your manifestation equation, please.
Well, okay. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. 1 second. Cause it's kind of complex. Here we go.
Perfect. I like how you're all set up. I love graphs and charts.
Okay. And okay. Okay. Now where do I share my...
Go down and you should see a green button to share.
Oh, there we go. Awesome. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
All right, hold on one sec. I'm going to give you the power. So I'm going to make you the host and then you'll be able to share.
Okay, cool.
Make host. There you go. You've got the power.
Okay. So
oh geez.
So this is the amount of mana expended, right? So where U is understanding, right? Here's the little definition, right? So mana is a Polynesian term for spiritual force, right? And that's accumulated by either A, existing in higher states. So I have like a state of being like ranking, like a thermometer. And the 5 states at the top are gratitude, agape, conviction, which is where you know that you're doing the right thing. You don't know if you're going to succeed or not, but you know you're doing the right thing. Faith, which is where you know you're going to succeed at something, right? You have that like divine certainty, right? And revelation, where like you're knowing things that like there's no logical reason for you to know, like the senses beyond the senses, right? And so seeing truth and being in high states builds up mana, right? Understanding, this is by the way, one thing people don't get when it comes to law of attraction, right? There are many people who are doing everything the law of attraction books tell you to do when they walk into the casino and they still walk out losers. I know because I used to be a semi-professional card counter until I got banned from a bunch of casinos. But there are a lot of people who they're in a high state, they want to win, they're thinking of winning, you know, all that kind of stuff, and they still lose. That Las Vegas was not built on winners, right? Because they don't understand the statistics, they don't understand all that kind of stuff. Right. But even if you understand the statistics, you can manipulate it via card counting. If you understand the spiritual laws at play, then you can get better luck than perhaps you would otherwise get. Right. So like the understanding can take multiple forms. Right. Then this is intensity. And then this is the summation over time. Right. So that's the amount of mana expended in any given act of manifestation. So then you have this. Right. So then the actual outcome is also going to be related to attachment, because this is where the law of repulsion comes in. This is where the law of attraction comes in. And then this is expectation. So expectations play a role. So you can actually get some pretty interesting, so yeah, I kind of walked through the math here. You can get some pretty interesting examples here, right? So the more mana you build, the more manifestation you're going to get, right? You notice some people seem to be able to manifest outcomes and others don't. Somebody who's in a state of stress all the time isn't going to be able to manifest much. Right? But it can cut against you, because let's say you have high mana, but you have low expectation, right? Then what's going to happen is you can actually manifest yourself right out of a situation. I manifested myself out of a job before. That happened in 2016, and it was exactly this way, right? If you have something where expectation is negative and attachment is high, they can actually cancel each other out. So this is where you have cases where, you know, you'll have that like perpetual pessimist. You know, it's like everything's going to go wrong, and then it doesn't go wrong. And then you're like, see, you were wrong. And they're like, oh, well, the next thing's going to go wrong. Right. That's what's happening here. Right. They're never going to be able to manifest exactly what they want. They're only going to get the thing that they don't believe they can have. Right. So that's kind of, again, and that's just where you have the two negatives here canceling out. Right. Let's see here. Yeah, if intensity is low, if it's something you don't care about, there's no spiritual force effect on it. High intensity, so purity of desire, where it's something is like really, really important, like Michael Jordan, you know, those people are much more. David Goggins, as we mentioned, right? His intensity goes to 1. Most people can't go to an intensity of 1 because it's a scale of 0 to 1, right? David Goggins can. That's why he can do crazy shit. Intensity is high and expectation is negative. You burn up all your mana, right? And then like nothing happens, and it's like random stuff goes wrong in every area of your life because you're not manifesting anything, because you've exhausted. This is where you get attached to something, but you know, you're not expecting it to go right. Or sorry, you're not attached to it, but you have the high intensity where you're like, you keep thinking about it again and again and again, but you're not expecting it to go right. Then you just stress yourself into a thing. And then understanding sets a cap on how much mana you can expend. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of a lot of cool stuff here.
That's amazing. Well, I didn't expect that, and that's so fantastic. So, can you share what the optimal um I don't even know how to say it, like not the definition, but like the optimal sequence. How would that go? So you have a 1 for your will, and then
Okay,
you
okay,
have
yeah. So you want to have high understanding. Understanding is not a bounded variable, so it's not 0 to 1. You just want your understanding to be as high as possible, right? You want your mana to be as high as possible. Whichever one is lower of mana or understanding is the one that's going to be the limiting factor, right? So that means that you want to be going through your life, seeing the truth about a specific scenario that you're trying to manifest, especially, and being in those high states of gratitude and love and all that kind of stuff, right? If it's really important to you, you want your intensity to be at 1. But just keep in mind, right, that like there are multiple outcomes in life, and you can't have intensity of 1 for everything. So your intensities should ideally be proportional to your values, right? That way, you're going to get more manifestation on the things that matter to you the most, right? And that's, if you find people where their thoughts, right, the frequency of their thoughts and the intensity with which they dedicate their thoughts is not the stuff that they actually care about, and that disconnect that causes people to be unhappy, right? I mean, like, this is where we take all the stuff that I was talking about in like more layman's terms, and now we're getting into like very technical spiritual terms about it, right? You want your expectation to be high, right? You want to have that faith in yourself and in the outcome, right? That certainty, that conviction, that faith, everything there. You want your attachment to be low, right? So attachment goes, from, so attachment, was it 0 to 1 or 0 to -1? But you want your attachment to be low, right? And then, so expectation, attach, yeah. And that's all the variables.
right. And so if your attachment is super high, that's where you get the law of
That's where
propulsion.
you get the law of repulsion, exactly. And then you can
Repulsion.
actually repel it. So that's the -1 component to it.
That's awesome. I've never seen it laid out like that. So that's brilliant.
I'm sorry I'm a little bit rusty on this, because this is something I only teach to my most advanced students. And this is the first time I've ever shared it publicly. And I actually haven't taught it in a while. So I'm going a little bit off the cuff.
Yeah, it's really brilliant how you've taken, a scientific mind, and then you've kind of dove deep into the spiritual, quote, I guess self-help is a generic term for it, but it's beautiful to have that mind kind of analyzing some of these, esoteric things, and bringing scientists and scientific minds into, how do these monks do this? How does that person do that? Is there any reason for that? Like when I was in training with the 34th generation Shaolin masters, they had these acupuncture points of the energy body, and it was like so many lines. The lines that they had were just infinite, and this is something they've been teaching for thousands of years, that they all knew. And like, oh yeah, if you have a cold here, and it's like a point on the face, I'm like, what? And like, oh, if you're sore, it's like this here, and it was all normal to them. And one of the
Yeah, because
masters
it's a
there,
science that they've built up for 5,000 years or
it's a
more.
science, yeah. And so we're kind of not privy to that understanding. So it's going to be a beautiful day when the scientific method and science and modern technology really weaves with these ancient teachings.
So I know a guy who does that. I know a guy named David Thunder. He's actually from London, but he studied extensively in allopathic, medicine stuff. Then he did osteopathic, and then he went and he studied TCM, and he studied like all the depths of all this kind of stuff. He studied all kinds of different modalities and chakras and meridians and all this kind of stuff. And he studied so many different disciplines. Right. He studied everything from like neuroplasticity and motor engrams and all this really advanced stuff there to, exactly like which herbs and this the dude is a wizard, man. Like I went to him once. This was many years ago, back before I kicked my healing into overdrive. And I said, man, I just have this like weird pain that just keeps shooting up my arm. Right? Every time I try to do pull-ups or whatever, I can't do pull-ups anymore. And he goes, 1 second. So he lays me down. He goes and he sticks the needle in there, and then he turns on electric current. And he pulls it out, and he says, okay, you're good. And it was just gone.
That's amazing. Yeah, who knows what the limits of this wizardry are. I have a friend, Dr. Barolando, talking about waveform mechanics and things, and it's all to do with electricity. All these brilliant minds talk about something.
I would say there's electricity, there's electromagnetism, and then there's non-physical vibrations, right? And so the like electromagnetic fields can interface with these higher level vibrations that don't manifest in the physical world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of. So they would be off of those because there's electromagnet, and if you leave, I haven't read it yet, but I keep getting it recommended to me. It's like I think it's called the Electric Rainbow or something like that. The audience is definitely going to know what I'm talking about. And then the work of Walter Russell. Are you familiar with him?
That name sounds vaguely familiar, but I
Yeah,
don't think.
you would like Walter Russell because and it's interesting because the Native American that I studied with, one of them, David Lone Bear and Robert Grant, and one other person as well. I think Bear. He said there's one force here. It's electricity, and they all said the same thing. And Robert Grant is this brilliant mathematician, and I don't even know what the hell he's saying to me half the time. But he's like, yeah, it's just one energy, and so I think it's like connecting to that. But then there's electromagnetism, and that's something how do you differ between those two, like electro and electromagnetism?
Yeah,
Because
so from a scientific
the heart's
perspective,
electromagnetic, right?
yeah, so from a
So it
scientific perspective, electricity is just the flow of electrons, right? Electromagnetism is a force. So when you have a flow of electrons, an electric current, it generates a magnetic field, right? And then when you can also generate an electric field. So there's electricity, the flow of electrons, there's an electric field, and there's a magnetic field. And the magnetic field is always going to be at this weird, like perpendicular angle to the electricity. And it creates all this kind of stuff. But the heart, because it has electricity going through it, generates an electromagnetic field. It generates both an electric field and a magnetic field, and they're perpendicular to each other, right? And so you have this like torus shaped field that comes out of it, right? And so that book I was talking to you earlier, The Electromagnetic Brain by Dr. Shelley Joy, she's talking about how microtubules and red blood cells all channel that electromagnetic field, and also how she hypothesizes, and she has a fair amount of evidence that, makes sense, that it is coming from stuff below the level of the size that we can measure. So if you look at like the size of stuff, right? You have stuff that's 1 meter. Okay, we can see a meter, right? If you go down to like 10 to the negative 20 meters, then that's like the smallest stuff that science can measure right now. But there's another 20 orders of magnitude before you get down to like where space, to the smallest possible unit of space. So the Planck length is another 20 orders of magnitude that we have an idea what's going on down there, right? And so her hypothesis is that, from that base Planck length, that is where you go into, the more non-physical realms, which operate more on frequency. So in electrical engineering, frequency and the Fourier transform and all that kind of stuff measures, so it's what's called the frequency domain. So it's this like mathematical abstraction that for whatever reason is really useful when it comes to circuits and manipulating circuitry, right? And the hypothesis is that that frequency domain, which is outside of time, connects more to the non-physical realms.
Wow. Well, that's epic. It makes sense to me for being electromagnetic in the heart. Like, how do we connect to this unified field or the quantum field or the unseen realm? And when we're trying to connect with maybe chi or prana, if we can learn how to generate that field within the body with our intent, with our will, with our organs, with our heart, whatever the case is, or even our cells, to generate that, then we're taking in energy from our surroundings, connecting with it, and then applying force or applying will to creation. And you gave an example with your
With the
equation
samurai
there.
that I trained with.
No, well, I like that one. Well, this is for manifesting, and
Oh yeah.
I had an interesting person, talk about crazy manifestation. Somebody that I met who ended up spending 100 days in meditation, 20 hours a day, and came out and like had a really profound awakening. He said, yeah, I wanted to test what I now knew. And he's like, I was able to manifest at a rapid speed. And I go, well, what's different now? And he goes, well, when I walk, I walk. When I drive. When I eat, I eat. He doesn't have these random thoughts. And so I kind of equated it with, okay, ask and it is given. I'm going to make this request to the universe, and it's dropping 100-pound stone into a water, right? And then those waves ripple out, right? And then what you're talking about, the law of repulsion, is like, oh, I'm so attached to it, or I'm so not expecting. I'm not worthy. I'm not going to get this. So that would be 100 pounds of doubt. So that would cross that signal out and make it no attraction whatsoever. Well, for
Exactly.
him,
Or even worse, it could overwhelm it and create manifest the exact opposite.
right? Yeah. And so for him, I think all he did was drop that in, right?
And let it
And then
be.
you could imagine random thoughts that you have throughout the day. Those would just be raindrops. So they would just be distortions in the field. Well, he didn't have those. So he had 100% expectation, zero doubt, and zero attachment. So
Yep.
poof, he had this, and he's like, once I was able to do it a few times, he's like, okay, now I know that it works. It serves no purpose, but that's fascinating. And so it lines up with your equation. It's just a challenging space to get to for, I don't know, somebody who's stuck in the monkey mind like me, or going around the,
You don't seem like you're super stuck in the
yeah.
monkey mind, bro.
Well, I'm moving more into alignment, you know what I mean? More over to that space. And I feel like it's polarities, right? We're shifting, and it's that awareness piece. If you complain, just notice that. If you're stuck in self-doubt or self-pity, become aware of that, and then you can change it. It's not that you're never going to experience those things. It's just stay there less, right? Grumpy, angry people who are depressed and stressed out stay there most of the time,
Yep.
so just start staying there less and less and less, and then stay
Bit by bit,
more.
piece by piece.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a really wonderful podcast. I've enjoyed this. Is there anything that you wish that I'd asked, or that you would like to touch on that came up before we close the show?
No, honestly, I feel like I've given out more info on this podcast than any other podcast that I've done, because we've just really explored really freely, and to me, that's awesome. I love that. Like I told you, I'm built to absorb, process, and transmit information. So I've been in my zone. I've had a lot of fun with it, and I feel like I've said everything that I've been called to say, and it's great. I love it.
Awesome. Well, this has been a pleasure. Where do people find more about you? Obviously, your stuff. This was great, and I really love that manifestation equation, and even just the first 15 minutes, people could listen to that and have pretty much 90% of what they need to move in that direction towards awakened fulfillment. And the analogy that I give is like your life purpose is not an end destination; it's a direction. Are you happy about the destination you're going? You could have a stormy day on the ocean. You could have a beautiful day on the ocean, but you're going to be developing your skills along the way. But ultimately, are you moving in a direction that is inspiring and meaningful to you? And then the other thing is, when you're on the boat navigating, are you cursing everything? Or are you learning to be in harmony with the environment, understanding that storms come, understanding that challenges come, understanding that there's process and there's maintenance, right? Like, sometimes I get upset. I got all this housework to do, but say, you know what? I can do all this, and I can let all the business stuff and that's to the side right now, because there's life, there's tending the garden, there's family time. It's combining all those worlds together. Sometimes it's like for me anyway, I'll level one thing more important. So then it's like, oh, I'm doing this, but I need to get here, rather than just being in the thing that I'm doing now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely, I agree with the sense that it's like you do want to have an endpoint, I think. But if you're saying, hey, I'm not going to be happy until I get to that endpoint, you're screwed, because now you've just fallen into attachment, and then, right? So you've got to have an endpoint that's inspiring enough that the journey is worth it, whether you get there or not. It's like, I think the Dalai Lama had a quote. He said, if the goal is truly noble, then whether or not it will be accomplished in your lifetime is utterly irrelevant. And it's got to be something that, as you say, is inspiring enough that making the journey, whether you succeed or fail, is worth it. I mean, in
Well,
the old days, people would set out to sail across the ocean. They had no idea whether they'd get to the other side. They had no clue, as you say, right? Think about the Vikings, they sailing across icy waters, whatever. Is there land on the other side? We think so. I'm not sure, right? But they said, hey, this is an epic journey. And if nothing else, it would be told in a saga, and that kind of ability, again, to step outside of the story and to see your characters, say, you know what, this is a good story. Don't know how it's going to end. We're going towards Mordor or wherever it is, but it's a good story, right? There's a lot of power in that.
yeah, I agree with that. The idea of, you're shooting for the moon. If you miss, you land among the stars. And so the example I give, and I I appreciate this because I'll have to add this in when I use this analogy again. But it's like Conor McGregor, where, he had the dream of going to UFC, win 2 belts. Well, he did that thing. He accomplished this massive thing, but it's not done. It's just a point in the evolution that's always unfolding. So that was his first massive goal, his massive dream. Now from there, it's going to recalculate and
Mhm.
continue going in an inspiring direction that might even be bigger. So I
Time to
feel
write a
like,
sequel.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, but yeah, it's all that process and a meaningful goal. But from there, it's like, holy crap, I'm only 30 something. I just hit those 2 things. Now, what's the next island? What's the next sail? What's the next voyage that I'm going to create for my life?
Yep. Yep. And I think those are two important principles. One is don't get to the point where you say, I'm not going to be happy till I get there. And don't get to the point where you say, hey, I got here, so now I'm happy. Because you'll find that you're not. My dad retired when I was really young. My dad was this first salesman for what was a little startup called NVIDIA that became a very big company. He didn't have to work anymore. And he didn't have a goal. And man, you should have seen the kinds of stuff that he did to try to keep himself entertained, right? You can't let yourself like stop and slow down. As you say, if you get there, right, then set a new goal and be happy as you journey towards that one too. Like as long as you're still around, there's a reason.
Yeah, I love it. Well, where can people find more about you and follow your work and get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website's www.oculusinstitute.com. You can go like the Oculus Institute page on Facebook. I run a free Facebook group called The Science of Career Freedom, and I will be publishing a book within the next couple months. I'm still going back and forth with my publisher on some final stuff, but within the next couple months, and also called The Science of Career Freedom. And that book is going to go into a lot more detail. When you talked about those first 15 minutes, right, where I was going over the process and everything, it's going to be all of that in a tremendous amount of detail. So
Amazing. Well, I look forward to that. Make sure you ping me when it comes out so I can promote it for you. And
thank you.
yeah, thanks for coming on the show. And this has been great.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right.